we can circle back when you can count.
Okay. Where's he gone, Sneako?
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. Now, as some of you know, I took a bit of a hiatus from YouTube because I was in Las Vegas for a couple of months doing a residency at the Venetian Hotel and Casino, 5 nights a week. A lot of you came to see the show, and it was so awesome, but I am now back, and we are doing weekly analysis videos starting with this one. Now, while I was gone, there were a couple of things that happened in the media that you guys asked me to cover, and this topic is at the top of that list, both in the number of times that it was requested, but also in the really great behavioral moments that we're seeing during this interview. The interview in question was conducted by Piers Morgan on his talk show Uncensored, and he was talking to Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, and his associate Sneako. And right in the beginning of the interview, like just a couple of minutes in, Ye got worked up, stood up, and walked away. And then Piers continued talking to Sneako, and things got quite heated. But what do the body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal about what really happened in this dramatic moment? And more importantly, what behavioral cues did we see early on in the interview that would indicate that some kind of confrontation was on the horizon? Let's dive right in.
2 years ago, I interviewed Kanye Ye West on Uncensored after he'd made global headlines for anti-Semitic outbursts. It was a heated interview. It was a long interview. I held him to account. I told him his remarks were offensive. He'd caused many people a lot of pain. And he gave me some back, of course. He called me a Karen. Fair enough, I can take it. At least we had a mostly grown-up conversation. Obviously, I have no idea what's going on in this guy's head, and he's unquestionably a genius artist with a global fan base and massive talent. He's lived most of his life under the microscope of intense fame, and that pressure alone can make people behave very oddly. What we now know is just the tip of the iceberg. As far as the watching public is concerned, Ye has spiraled in both his personal life and his business life. Most recently, he's taken to posting endless, outrageous anti-Semitic slurs. Our producer spotted that he was in Spain with his friend Sneako, and we invited both of them on for an interview. They very quickly agreed, and Sneako spent several days talking about it, but they mucked us around, a significant expense, both in time and money, to me, my crew in Spain, and my team here in London. More importantly, he didn't turn up yesterday and said wanted to do it today. So it seemed to me then it might all just be a stunt. But I went ahead and said, okay, we'll have another go today. Ye told Sneako not to be offended if he stormed off very shortly before today's interview started. You can judge for yourself how it went and whether Ye has any respect or, frankly, any marbles. I'm not a shrink.
Okay, so a lot going on just in this intro, even before we get to the interview. So even right in the beginning, the first sentence out of his mouth, he goes, 2 years ago, I interviewed Kanye Ye West on Uncensored. And there's a lot of stuff going on just in that sentence. First, I want to start with something that we see the moment he says Ye. If you look at his face, more particularly his mouth, you see that the corner of the left side of the mouth comes up like this as he says Ye. And his voice goes up as he accentuates that Ye.
2 years ago, I interviewed Kanye Ye West on Uncensored after he'd made global headlines.
So 2 years ago, I interviewed Kanye, pause, Ye West. And we see that pause, and then we see the corner of the mouth come up as he's saying Ye. So there's a lot of great research on the universal emotions. These are the emotions that are expressed pretty much the same everywhere in the world across different societies. And there's one of them that we see everywhere in the world on one side of the face, and that's contempt. Contempt is defined as looking down on something or having a sense of moral superiority. And it often comes with this kind of side glance and a scrunching on one side of the face. Sometimes it looks like this, sometimes it looks like this. But it's one side of the mouth that's scrunching towards the nose. Now, although there's a lot of great research on the meaning and signs of contempt, one of my favorite bodies of work on the subject was from researcher and psychologist Dr. Gottman, who spent decades studying relationships and determined that contempt is the #1 indicator of divorce or separation in marriages or romantic relationships. In other words, if the nonverbal signs of contempt are displayed while the couple is communicating, it is a huge indication that that relationship is not going to work out. So right in the beginning, when Piers pauses and then says, Ye, And you could hear the contempt, you could feel the contempt, but that mouth going up on one side is unmistakable. And it's going to happen several other times throughout this video. Now, something we talk about a lot on the channel is baseline, and it's important to remember that here because there are a lot of people who habitually speak more out one side of their mouths. Piers Morgan is not one of those people. He speaks pretty symmetrically, although in this video, there are going to be key moments where we see that one-sided scrunch, and it lines up very well with those communications or feelings of contempt. After the intro, he goes on to summarize the conversation that he had with Ye 2 years ago, and he brings up examples of why he thinks what he thinks about Ye. And if you want to see the whole video, I'll leave a link in the description where you could check it out. But I don't want to focus on all that negativity. I want to focus on some of these great behaviors. So after the summary, he says a really important sentence.
At least we had a mostly grown-up conversation.
He says, at least we had a mostly grown-up conversation. And this is really interesting because there are a lot of things in this that we listen for in interviews and interrogations. The first one is an exclusion. It's not that we had a grown-up conversation, it was mostly a grown-up conversation. In other words, there were parts of it that may not have been grown up, but for the most part, at least that one was a grown-up conversation. Exclusions or exclusion qualifiers are something you should very much pay attention to in day-to-day conversations because they give us a clue that we're not getting the full story. So if somebody in a job interview says, I usually show up to work on time, that's different from saying that I show up to work on time as a habit. Same in, for example, a relationship. If somebody's talking about their relationships and says, for the most part, or usually, I tend to be very faithful, that might be a clue that there were times where they were not. The other thing that's really interesting about this sentence is the overspecificity. Why did he feel the need in this introduction to say that it was a mostly adult conversation? As if any of us were wondering or asking if it was an adult conversation. This is a really, really good foreshadowing tool. So whenever someone's telling you about a situation, but before they talk about that, they talk about something else to set the context. Sometimes we find clues in how specific they are in that context that'll let us know what's about to happen in the story they're about to tell. And this is a perfect example of that. The second he said, at least we had a mostly adult conversation, we immediately know that he believes that this next conversation that they had, that he's about to talk about, was not an adult conversation. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say you're talking to someone about their current relationship, for example, and to tell you the story, they go back to their previous relationship. And while they're telling you about that relationship, they say, yeah, so my ex before this, I dated them a couple of years ago, and in that one, at least everybody was faithful. Now we immediately know that in this next story, this next relationship, there's gonna be some issues about fidelity. So that's something else that you could pay attention to in day-to-day conversations. If all of a sudden you get this weird amount of specificity, especially when it's something that you didn't ask or didn't even cross your mind, it gives you a clue that some contrasting information might be coming up because they're prefacing it, they're foreshadowing the issue. Okay, next up, we get a lot of really great behavioral stuff with a sentence that he says. It's when he says, obviously, I have no idea what's going on with this guy's head. He's unquestionably a genius artist. And just in that sentence, we see a ton of stuff. First, once again, contempt. So as he says, this guy's head, as he's saying head, again, we see one corner of the mouth rise up and scrunch really quickly as he delivers that.
Obviously, I have no idea what's going on in this guy's head, and he's unquestionably...
But that's not the only sign of contempt. There's also the use of the word this guy. I obviously have no idea what's going on in this guy's head. And that in and of itself is a contemptuous way to refer to someone. Because usually when we talk about someone, we say, I have no idea what's going on in his head. I have no idea what's going on in Ye's head. But he says this guy. And that's such a dismissive way to refer to someone. Imagine if we're hanging out with a group of people and consider the difference between me saying, oh, when did Robert get here? And, oh, when did this guy get here? Especially with that, when did this guy get here? With that scrunching on the side of the face, this is unmistakably contempt. Now, there is a note to be made here. I don't know who writes his script on his teleprompters. I don't know if he has a say. I don't know if he makes real-time edits as he's talking about it. But even in the tone, in the way it said, this guy, and then we see this guy's head with that contempt, the whole thing feels contemptuous. Word choice and body language. Speaking of teleprompters, I pretty much guarantee that the next sentence that he said was on a teleprompter, and if I had to bet, I'd bet that he's not the one who chose those words. Because the sentence is, he's unquestionably a genius artist. But we see three distinct things in his behavior.
And he's unquestionably a genius artist.
The first is a pause. He's unquestionably, pause, a genius artist. Second, The hand turns up as he says genius artist at the exact same time that we see the head tilt like this as he says genius artist. There is a lot of great research on this sudden palm up gesture mid-conversation, and especially when it's combined with other parts of the body going up and that head tilt at the same time as well. So we'll start with one of my favorites. It's called the palm up puzzle. And these researchers studied just that palm up all over the world to see if it has universal meaning. And they found that pretty much everywhere in the world, when that hand comes up in conversation, it's usually one of two reasons. The first one is some kind of exchange, right? So if I'm offering an idea and saying, here, consider this, or do you understand? Something like this, some kind of an exchange where I'm giving an idea or taking an idea. And the second one is called an epistemic gesture, which has something to do with knowledge. I don't know, I'm not sure, a lack of knowledge. This goes hand in hand, no pun intended, with research out of the Université Paris-Nanterre by Camille Desbras, which we talk about very often on the channel because it is one of the best studies on shrugging, whether it's with the shoulders, the eyebrows, the head, the hands, any form of shrugging. And one of the forms of shrugging is an epistemic shrug as well, a lack of knowledge. I don't know what to add to that, I don't know what to say, so a lack of knowing something. So in this case, as he says, he's unquestionably, and he pauses before the next words, because it takes him a second to register and deliver those words, and then we see what constitutes a shrug with the hand and with the head, as he goes like this. And again, remember that hand up, very often associated with, I don't know, I'm not sure, so an uncertainty. So in this moment, it's quite likely that what he's communicating with his body language is he really a genius artist? Is that the words we want to choose here? Unquestionably a genius artist. I think he's not 100% sure that he agrees with those words. Okay, so now we're actually going to look at the interview and some behavioral elements that indicate right out the gate that things are about to go south fast. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
Ye West is rarely out of the headlines at the moment. It's fair to say the headlines are equally rarely positive. The rapper, producer, and fashion designer is currently working on a new album. Several new tracks were previewed on a recent live stream with his friend Sneako. And both Sneako and Ye join me now. Well, welcome to Uncensored. Ye, we haven't spoken for a while. How are you?
I'm doing good. I don't use the term West, the whole drop the slave name idea.
Okay, so we just call you Ye, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, look, when I last interviewed, we had a long conversation. And since then, a lot has happened in your life. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to try and talk to you about some of this. How would you say your life is at the moment?
I mean, you see that view?
Yeah. Your life is good?
Well, judge it on the view as the answer to how my life is. Judge me by the view.
Well, the view is Mallorca. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. And for all intents and purposes, you seem very relaxed and happy. That is in direct contrast to your public image at the moment over the last couple of years, led by your ferocious... Well, hang on, let me finish the question. Led by your ferocious use of...
No, but I already disagree. It's not in contrast. There's so many people and artists that are championing the idea of someone being able to just express who they really are and have been able to go through the war of being attacked by the banks, being attacked, by the banks. That's the best way to put it, being attacked by the banks and to still be here with this view is, that's the win. So I think I'm in contrast to your contrast.
Yikes, so right away off to a bad start. And I want to begin by looking at the body language and contrasting the body language between Ye and his associate Sneako as the camera cuts to them and they're being introduced. So if you look at Sneako, we're seeing a lot of what you normally see before, like right at the beginning of an interview. So the first thing we're seeing is some grooming gestures there with the tie. He's adjusting his tie. And grooming gestures are anything that we do to correct our appearance. And this is very often a sign that our attention has been turned inwards. So if mid-conversation you're talking to someone and all of a sudden you see them grooming, this is a good indication that they're suddenly self-conscious. And if there isn't really a reason for that, you could start asking yourself why that happened. But before an interview, or right at the beginning of an interview, it's extremely common to see these grooming gestures. We also see him put his phone away because it's time to give your attention to this interview. So very common things that we see. Now, if we contrast that with Ye, we're seeing pretty much the opposite of that, like a lot of behaviors that are literally the opposite. So first off, we see him sitting back in his chair. They're both sitting back in their chair, but Ye has more of a careless demeanor to him. And one of the indications of that is that he's got his hand up like this, just leaning on it. So in a lot of cases, if I'm just kind of leaning on my hand like this is a signal that I'm bored or uninterested or you don't really have my full attention. And so we already see that right in the beginning. He's also talking over Piers. So as Piers is introducing him, we see him mutter something as he kind of looks over to Sneako, and I think he's saying, why do they say West? It sounds like he's saying something along those lines.
Well, welcome to Uncensored. Yeah, we haven't spoken for a while. How are you?
So immediately he realized that Piers said, we have Ye West. He used his last name, whereas he doesn't want that name to be used anymore, and he's going to bring it up almost immediately. So instead of waiting for Piers to finish and expressing that, he starts muttering something while Piers is still talking, which immediately could be seen as another sign of disrespect and could start to elevate that tension already. And then literally the polar opposite of Sneako, who looked at his phone and then tucked it away, Ye now starts looking for his phone. So as he's talking, we see him, looking down, he grabs his phone, he kind of looks at it. And this is an intentional signal that he's sending to Piers saying, you don't have my attention. Like, I'm barely interested in this. And this is him trying to establish dominance in the conversation. In fact, a lot of what we've seen, even before the interview starts, is him trying to establish dominance. For example, they were 22 hours late, which I don't even know what that means. That basically means you postponed it to the next day. Like, they didn't show up the day that they agreed to the interview, and the next day they were like, okay, I guess we'll just do it today. So he's already trying to establish, I'm the one who calls the shots. Now he's talking over Piers. He's looking for his phone, leaning on his hand. All these signs of like, I don't really care about this. This is beneath me. Now, when the interview begins, Ye says, I'm doing good. I don't use the term West, so immediately makes that correction about his name. So to determine whether or not this was said in a malicious way, because Piers said Ye West, and then he said Ye. When he addressed him, he just said Ye, but when he introduced him, he used that last name. To know if this was malicious, we would have to know how clearly Piers understands Ye's request for his name, because it hasn't been very clear. Like, he goes by Ye, we know that, but does that mean you drop the last name entirely? Do we not use the last name? So right in the beginning, it could have been corrected in a more polite way, but if Ye is perceiving this as a disrespect to his request, he's already, right out the gate, irritated that his name isn't being respected because he doesn't want to use West. Now, there's something coming up that's really, really ironic about this whole name correction and getting the name right. And it's something that not a lot of people are talking about, but we're gonna talk about it because it's really important. But before we get to that, there's something really interesting happening here that relates back to that struggle for dominance in the conversation, and it's something that we see a lot in interview and interrogation settings. So Piers asks Ye, how are you? And Ye's answer is, look at the view. Judge me by the view. In other words, look at this amazing view. Look at where I am. So obviously, if I'm in a place like this, things are going really, really well. So this is something we often see in corporate interviews or criminal interrogations. So we might ask something to the person like, are you somebody who drinks very often? And they might answer something along the lines of, well, quite often when I go out with my friends, I'm the designated driver. So this tries to redefine the question and answers a part of it. Fine, on those nights where you go out with your friends, you might be the designated driver. So that might indicate that on those nights, you may not drink that much. But that doesn't really answer my question. What about outside of those nights? So the person's attempt to redefine the question or zero in on a specific part of the question makes it seem like they're being upfront and honest, but to a trained interviewer, it has the polar opposite reaction. We know that something's being hidden. So if I were to ask you right now to make a list of things that we would look at to determine how happy or how good someone's life is, you might, somewhere in that list, I don't think it would be at the top, but somewhere in that list, you might put like their current living situation. Where are they? Are they at a nice villa in Mallorca, for example? And that could be a good indication, but it's like a small part of that list. There'd be things that are much higher than that, you know? How are your relationships with your family going? How are your relationships with the public going, especially for a celebrity? Yeah, money would be part of that, you know, access to income, access to wealth, health, all these things. I don't think I would put at the top of the list, oh, well, if you want to know how someone's doing, look at the view of their background. That's the number one indication. It's not. What Ye is trying to do here is to say, I think that the view is an indication that I have a good life, so why don't you look at the view and tell me how good my life is? That's what's important. But look at what Piers does. As an experienced interviewer, he immediately notices that Ye is trying to redefine the question in saying, you know, the view is what's important to know how my life is. And the first thing he does is that he diminishes the importance of the view. Because Ye is trying to suggest that, look, there's such a unique view, such a great lifestyle, not everybody can have access to this. Piers goes, yeah, you're in Mallorca, it's beautiful, I've been there too. So he normalizes the view. It's not that big a deal. And now he redirects back to the question and saying, no, here's what's actually important. Because he goes, for all intents and purposes, you seem relaxed, you seem happy, but that's in direct contrast with what's going on in the public eye with you. And that's more important than the view. So we're seeing this conversational struggle to establish what's more important for happiness. And as a response, what does Ye do? He re-challenges the challenge. So it's really this struggle because he goes, well, I already disagree with what you're saying because it's not that bad. There are all these people and artists out there who are championing someone being able to express, you know, all this stuff. And again, this is a bit of a redirect because there really aren't that many people who are championing these rants that he goes off on social media, these prejudicial or mean-spirited things that he says. I would say no one, but you know, on social media, you're always going to find a couple of outliers, but there really isn't a big body of people who are championing or encouraging his posts. And besides, notice how he's countering the criticism as opposed to countering the way he feels about it, right? So if he actually felt good, if he was actually happy in life, and look at this view and I'm living the good life, if Piers brought up like all this stuff that's happening online, the counter argument to that would be that it's not affecting him. Yeah, all these people could say what they want. I've got a good life. I'm happy. That doesn't affect me. Instead, he's trying to counter that and saying, no, hold on. There are so many people who are on my side of this. So therefore, he's kind of acknowledging that this is getting to him and it's contributing to his quality of life, but it's okay because there's all these people on my side. So Piers actually kind of got him there, even if Ye isn't that aware of it in that response.
Okay, but the point I was going to make is that I watch what you put out on X. You got 32 million followers, so you're one of the most followed people.
See, wait. Now look right now. You're not gonna take inches off my dick, bro. Like, how many followers do I have?
Well, how many is it?
I think you could do the study. You got a whole staff over there.
I thought it was 32 million. How many is it? You obviously know.
I mean, no. I mean, don't help them out. You know they.
I'm told it's 33 million now. So congratulations. You're slightly bigger following than I thought.
No, congratulations. Your information is correct. You're not just some, dude trying to sub. I'm a gift, bro. You know what I mean? Why do all you people in media act like you haven't played my songs at your weddings or graduations or at funerals or when your child was born? You take somebody that's living like a Lennon, a Michael Jackson, and you just take all this time to just like that nuance right there. It's idiotic. It just shows the hate that you put out for people that put love. There's so much love in the art that I put out.
What are you talking about? I haven't said anything.
What are you talking about? It's 30. Okay, now you're not taking accountability or responsibility.
You said it. You implied I haven't played your music. Of course I played your music.
No, sir. This is what you get for now. We can circle back when you can count.
Okay. Where's he gone, Sneako?
That's it for Ye. But it's nice to meet you, Piers.
Okay, first of all, I just have to know. I have to know from the viewers, is there really anyone who, when their child was born, was like, hold on, doctor, hold on, wife, hold on, I gotta put on my Ye playlist? Because that's what he said. He's like, you people in the media, why do you act like you didn't play my music at graduations? Fine. Weddings? Absolutely. Funerals? Maybe, I don't know. But when your child is born, I didn't play any music when my child was born. Wait, was I supposed to? Anyways, body language wise, I gotta say, it's pretty impressive how Piers Morgan overall, not just in this interview, but in other interviews as well, has the ability to remain rather stoic in moments where I would expect to see some kind of emotional reaction. Because here we see Ye going off on a rant, he gets up and walks away, and we don't really see that much nonverbal communication from Piers. And this could very well be because he has a lot of experience hosting debates where there are opposite people saying opposite things, and he just kind of is used to just sitting there stoically waiting for it to be finished. And then when he expresses himself, we see a lot more nonverbal communication, but not so much as a reaction. Even when Ye got up and walked away, we see like this quick double take, like he just kind of looks, he looks away and then he looks back up just to make sure he sees what he thinks he sees. But we don't see this like reaction or anything really. He just kind of waits and goes, where did he go? Like he just asks his next question. I would say the slightest thing that we see in Piers' body language is that when things get confrontational, we see a couple of hard swallows, and we do see the breathing move more up to the chest as opposed to a more relaxed belly breathing. And that's usually, you see that in the shoulders. When we breathe with more stress, we see those shoulders move a little bit more. So we see a little bit of that, but besides that, he's rather stoic and calm throughout this heated moment. Now what happens next is, I think, more of a reaction to the general mood of the interview rather than something that was specifically said by Piers. Because Ye goes off on this rant about how people in the media don't give him credit, he's a gift, don't pretend like you don't play my music at all your events, I don't get credit, and all this kind of stuff. To which Piers says, what are you talking about? I didn't say anything. And they both kind of have a point, and they're both kind of wrong in this situation. Because yes, Piers didn't outright say anything to flat out explicitly disrespect Ye and his work, but in the way that he's communicating, in the way that perceivably to Ye, he used his last name, which is a sign of disrespect, the way he got the number wrong and didn't apologize for that, just said, why don't you tell me what the number is? He feels like this is more disrespect from the media, which is already something that he's very tuned in to notice because he feels that the media disrespects him. In a lot of cases, rightfully so. He's done a lot of really crazy stuff on social media, but he's not separating the two here. He feels that there's no salvaging the way Piers feels about him, and so he's working himself up into a frenzy, and he's just storming off, while Piers is going, what the hell was that? I didn't say anything. Now with Ye gone, Piers turns to Sneako, and right in the beginning, Sneako is actually quite polite, and he goes, it's nice to meet you, Piers. And in a moment, there's going to be a confrontation there, but that confrontation will exist because Sneako doesn't necessarily want to burn a bridge with Piers Morgan. I mean, this is one of the biggest interviews in the world, so I'm sure he'd rather have a decent relationship there, but his loyalty is with Ye. So in a moment when Piers is at odds with Ye in this conversation, Sneako is immediately going to turn away from this, nice to meet you, to kind of taking Ye's side because that's where his loyalty is.
Yeah, that's it for Ye. But it's nice to meet you, Piers.
Where's he gone?
I think he's just going back to work. There's several things he's working on. I was not aware he was going to leave like this, but it seems like he got upset about the...
So it's all just a game, is it? Is that the idea?
Followers. I mean, life is a video game, is it?
No, I just wonder what the point of this exercise was. Was he supposed to do an interview or not?
Are you supposed to do an interview? But I mean, the amount of Twitter followers, something like that, it's patronizing for no reason. You said his name incorrectly. His name is Ye. This is very public about that. Hopefully we could do it. I think this was good. We were prepared for a good interview. But come on, you know what you were doing.
What do you think I'm doing?
I think you were trying to patronize very intentionally by getting those two things, under his skin. Maybe it could have been about past interviews or because of what happened yesterday. But, I mean, this information is not that difficult to get right.
Out of interest,
you were subjective.
Out of interest, what do you do with him?
I'm working on several films right now. I am streaming out here. I'm editing. And I work on things behind the scenes, some inspiration for art. I'm just there to try to help fulfill his vision.
Well, let me ask you the questions I would have asked him. So, I mean, out of interest, what is with his obsession with Hitler? Why is he so rampantly anti-Semitic?
I'm not going to answer questions on his behalf.
Well, you're going to have to because he's not there. I can't answer questions
on his behalf.
He's not there.
What's that? What's that?
He's not there. Literally, he's dropping a track today called particular? Why are you happy to be associated with somebody like that out of interest?
I'm not going to speak on his art and his vision while
I'm
he's
asking
not here.
you.
I'm
asking you why you're happy to be associated with somebody who most of the world believes is now a rampant anti-Semite.
Well, you're associated as well. Your show's called Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Yeah.
You tried to get him censored on X. And here you are on the days we're going to release this song doing an interview with him. So we're all involved here. It's not like I'm the only one complicit.
Okay, so now things are escalating between Piers and Sneako, and there's something right in the beginning that is massively ironic. And it's something that Sneako says. He says, the amount of Twitter followers, something like that is patronizing for no reason. You said his name incorrectly. You know his name is Ye.
Amount of Twitter followers, something like that, it's patronizing for no reason. You said his name incorrectly. You know his name is Ye.
So he's telling Piers off for getting the number of social media followers wrong and for getting his name wrong. But in making that point, he may have very well explained why Piers got the name wrong. And it's in his use of the word Twitter. He said Twitter followers. Twitter doesn't exist anymore. It's now called X. That's the new name. But a lot of us remember it as Twitter. That's where it started. So it's not malicious. Sometimes when I talk about it, I'll say Twitter because that's the name that I remember. In the same way that very often when I talk about Ye, I might say Kanye or Kanye West, because for the longest time when he rose to fame, that was his name. And then all of a sudden he came out and his name is now Ye. And let's keep in mind that Piers Morgan has an interview show where not all of his followers necessarily understand that he now wants to be called just Ye. No last name, just that. So although it's possible that he said Ye West disrespectfully, the fact that he immediately followed it by referencing him to him as Ye and asked him, hey Ye, how are you? And moving forward used only that name and didn't say Kanye West. He just said Ye West. I find it conceivable that it's old programming and he's not really sure how to navigate that. Are we dropping the last name? He's not really sure how to do that. So yeah, Ye could take that as disrespect because, production could have asked him, hey, how do you want to be referenced? What's your preference? They could have asked him and avoided this altogether, but Sneako just gave a brilliant example of how sometimes when something's in our head, it's just out of reflex that we call it that. So it's massively ironic that he goes, the Twitter followers, and then the next sentence says, his name isn't Ye. Well, you also know that it's not Twitter, it's X. Then I think Sneako does highlight the reason Ye got up and walked away. And again, it's not a specific thing that Piers said to intentionally insult him. He says, maybe in past interviews or this information that's not difficult to get right. And that, Ye obviously has a massive ego. So he expects when he goes to an interview for them to do their due diligence and know this is how many followers he has, this is what he likes to be called. So it's more the undertone of the way he's being talked to that he probably felt was disrespectful, and it's something that he's used to and looking for. So I think he was already on edge, given the past experiences, and he was just waiting for that excuse to get up and walk away. And it's the atmosphere that worked him into that frenzy to just say, I'm out of here. Next time, get the number right. Notice how in this portion, Sneako is often doing something called exit checking. And this is something you can look for in day-to-day conversations when somebody keeps looking away from the conversation, often towards the door or the exit. And it's a subconscious way of indicating that they might want to stop the conversation or something about it is stressing them out. So subconsciously, you could say he's trying to sneak off. Now, the direction he's looking is also likely where Ye is, complaining about the conversation, why they get the number wrong, they got my name wrong. I keep saying not to get my name wrong. So he's checking in on the person that is really his priority as well. And I think Sneako's in a very compromised situation here where he doesn't really know what to do. The guy's young, he's in his 20s, and he's still probably trying to figure out who he is and what his place in the world is. Take that and add to the fact that he's split between two people here where he's trying to keep a decent relationship with Piers, but also really has to make Ye happy, which is why we're seeing fluctuations in his politeness and who he's being nice to when, because he's kind of trying to balance both, and he himself doesn't know where he should land. So we're seeing a lot of this kind of politeness and then confrontation. And right at the end of this, we get a very clear indication that Sneako's loyalty is 100% with Ye, and that's not about to change. It's almost blind how much he's ready to defend Ye, because he's asked twice, well, in two different ways. Piers starts by asking him about Ye's rants online, and what does Sneako say? He says, I'm not going to speak on his behalf, Well, that would indicate that he's blindly defending him, right? Because if he thought that there was an actual defense, a real reasonable defense for those posts, he would say, look, here's my take on this, right? He's on this interview. Obviously, this guy wants to get his name out there. He wants the fame. If he had a reasonable response to that, he would say, here's my take on why I believe this is okay. He's got nothing. And it's because he's got nothing that he has to go, I'm not going to talk on his behalf, because he would have nothing to say. And again, here we see Piers' experience as an interviewer, because he immediately notices that he didn't get an answer. And in interviews, we pay attention to that. When a question is asked, did the response answer my entire question? In this case, it didn't. So the moment we see that, we have to dig deeper. And that's what he did. He didn't get an answer because he said, I don't want to speak on his behalf. So he kind of shifts it a little. He goes, okay, don't speak on his behalf. Tell me why you're happy being associated with someone like that. So it's the same question, but now he can't wiggle out of it the same way. This is a very experienced interviewer. So what does Sneako do? He honestly just says something that he probably right now really, really regrets. Because he basically gives the confession in going, well, it's not just me, right? You're also affiliated with him. You're interviewing him right now, but it's not the same thing. Piers is interviewing him to hold him accountable, to understand why he's doing these things. He's not working with him. He's not producing with him. He's not off in Mallorca with him. This is what interrogators pretty much hope for, where you ask a question, you go, why did you do such and such thing? And he goes, well, no, I wasn't the only one. There was these other people there as well. That's a confession. And in this case, he's not denying it. He's not saying, oh no, hold on. I really disagree with those posts. And it's not a great look. Piers used his experience and kind of got him here to confess that he's complicit. That's the word he used. I'm complicit with this behavior, but I'm not the only one. Okay, so there it was. A lot of really great lessons here about how things can escalate even if that's not specifically someone's intention, and how sometimes we can irritate someone inadvertently because of our word choice or just our nonverbal communication. I guess it's a big lesson that if you're going to make the decision to talk to someone with a really big ego, know the things that are likely to upset them and know things specifically about them. Because if you undermine them a little bit, this might be the result. And here we saw two egos continuously trying to clash until one of them said, I'm gonna remove myself from this situation. And the other one's going, well, what do I say? Not really knowing what they did specifically. So let me know in the comments what you think of this and who you think should have handled this situation differently. Do you think it's mostly Piers who should have, said the right numbers and said the right words? Or do you feel like Ye could have corrected that a little bit more politely and moved on with the interview? And also, where do you believe the negativity originated? Because we could look at Piers and say he should have gotten the number correctly and the name. But even before that, if we look at Ye's nonverbal communication right in the beginning, he seems disinterested and like he's already ready for a negative conversation. So what came first? Where did the negativity originate? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this video, and I will see you on the next one.